I want to wrap up our business. I'm going to have this board meeting and then one more board meeting to wrap up this business because I think I have a pretty good grasp on where everybody's position is on this ad hoc committee. And then ultimately, whatever we come up with has got to be presented to the full board. And I have a pretty strong inclination of what a lot of the board members think on this. But I do think that it is a good practice to thoroughly vet any issue that we're charged with. And I also think it's a good practice to update bylaws where they need to be updated. And I think that if the law or the bylaws are silent, it's wise to address it. So the first thing that I want to do before we kind of go through our board chairs historically, I want to turn it over to Liz briefly. Liz and her very able staff did some research and contacted some other large transit authorities, most notably with MARTA, New York City, and I think Bay Area Rapid Transit, but oh, there's Roberta. Hey, Miss Abdul Salam. We're just getting started.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. And so Ms. O'Neill contacted these three large authorities or agencies across the United States that are similar to MARTA insofar as they cover multiple jurisdictions, political subdivisions, whatever you want to call it. And she reached out to them with inquiries on their governance, on how they handle equal and representation and inclusive representation of other jurisdictions. So not that other authorities are not that they can dictate what we decide to do, but I do think it's best practices to at least see what other folks do. So Liz, if I'll turn it over to you for a brief kind of conclusion of your findings. Liz, you're on mute.
Sorry, thought I was done hearing that now. But I do want to say initially that New York MTA is not one of the ones. They're kind of their own unique entity because of the, Long Island Railroad, Metro North, all being part of that. So but for the other ones, and specifically, I think, Washington Metro was the one that you all had spoken about at the last meeting. They have the three jurisdictions of DC, Washington, Maryland, and Virginia. They have a compact and bylaws that set out the members. And so, but there was nothing in there about the chairmanship. So I did reach out to their council, and it is very much like MARTA's practice in that it is a practice that they do try to rotate among the three jurisdictions. They have been occasions where, for a variety of reasons, they have not adhered to that practice, but it is not codified anywhere. And that was pretty much the same in those other agencies where there's multiple jurisdictions. Nevada is another one. That was Vegas and Shabo County, I think, they share a several jurisdictions that sit on the board. And again, it is a practice to try to rotate the chairmanship among those different jurisdictions, but nothing is codified. Now, I can't say that I've looked at every transit agency, but to date have not found one that has set out a strict rotation or has anything in their bylaws that pertains to this issue.
And I know that in our previous conversations, you have stated that there are I know you said APTA has it, but have you found any jurisdictions or any other transit agencies that have guiding language in there to say, well, this is what we think should happen, this is what you should strive to do, but this is not a requirement?
And so other than the APTA one, no, the folks I've spoken with, it is, again, very similar to MARTA's in that it is an informal practice, kind of a gentleman's agreement type of an arrangement where there is a rotation.
Gotcha.
Liz, I have a question. So are all the terms 1 year or 2 years, or do you know of those that you checked?
No, so some were 1 year. I forget. I didn't write down which
Okay.
who was what, but yeah, there are some agencies that the chair rotates every year, and
Right.
then there was one actually. I think it was a 4-year period.
Wow.
So, but the majority were usually 1 or 2 years. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions of Liz on that topic? Well, thank you for looking into that. We appreciate it. And thank you for the time that you and your team put making those phone calls and reviewing it.
You're welcome.
The other thing that I want to discuss that I think that is very important to do is I wanted to go through the document that I sent around earlier today that that lists out the timeline and jurisdiction of every board chair MARTA has had since 1967. One of these documents were included in a board packet a while back, but as so often happens with board packets, it was kind of buried in it, and I don't think that every board member got the opportunity to really review it extensively. And it also wasn't extremely clear. It was obviously a photocopy of an old document that was scanned in. And it wasn't very clear, and it wasn't all the way up to date. It stopped. I believe that document stopped after Mr. Daniels. And so I on this new document, I've included Mr. Ash, Ms. Hardage, and Ms. Scott on there to really show all the way up until present day. I don't know how much you've been able to study it. I don't know if it's going to generate a lot of conversation, but my initial observations of this is that, historically we have had 26 chairmen since the authority started. And as I look through it, it's almost equal in numbers of chairmen from Fulton, DeKalb, and City of Atlanta, with City of Atlanta having a little bit of an edge on that, having a little bit more than the others, but it's fairly equally rotated. And I think that underscores the fact that the historic practice of MARTA has been trying to alternate jurisdictions in the chairmanship. The other thing that I observed from this is there have been times where it did not follow an orderly rotation in an exact pattern. And that goes all the way back to the beginning. You look at the beginning and you had 2 City of Atlanta appointees at the beginning. Then we kind of got into a pattern of rotating. And then you had back in the early 2000s, you had 2 DeKalb back to back with Mr. Durrett and Mr. Daniels. And I think that was, thank you for sharing that. And I think we know, Jim, you could even probably speak to that about, I think that was an agreement with you and Mr. Daniels of splitting the historic DeKalb position. You want to talk to that a little bit?
Sure. When I was elected, shortly thereafter, a number of new board members came on board, replacing those that were serving with me at the time. And when it came time to pull together the nominating committee at the end of that first year of mine, a member of the board expressed their reticence to having me to continue for one more year because that board member did not have a chance to actually have a voice in who would be the chairperson. And so I ended up just agreeing to step down just to keep the peace. And so that's how Fred Daniels served, and that's how I served for 1 year when it was a practice of 2. Or it was my understanding that it would be I would be serving 2 years. And so that's why I stepped down and why Fred was elected.
Good. And then obviously we know the story about Robbie serving 4 years instead of the traditional 2. I think the board decided that it was in the best interest of the authority to have steady leadership there as we changed general managers from Mr. Parker to Miss O'Neill's interim leadership, and then bringing in Jeff, the other Mr. Parker. And then, you know, one of the other things that I kind of view on this chart is of kind of out of order is starting with Miss McClendon in 91. That was a pretty lengthy run of City of Atlanta into CAB for almost a decade before another Fulton County appointee came in. And then that Fulton County appointee only served for a year before another City of Atlanta took back over the chairmanship. So that kind of decade there from 91 to about 2003, it seems like Fulton County was left out. And then obviously we know that Clayton joined the system in 2003. Isn't that correct, Ms. Abdul Salam?
No, Clayton didn't actually join the system until 2014.
2014. Okay. All right. So really starting with Mr. Ash is where Clayton joined the system. And then was part of it and have board members. So, you know, my initial takeaways from this is the MARTA has operating under the status quo that we're operating under now seems to have ultimately, when you look at the numbers, pretty equivalent representation within the chairmanship, but it is not a definite rotation between exact jurisdictions. And I think that, you know, a lot of this historic stuff, you know, I was mentioning the decade from 91 to 2003. I don't think any of us were on the board, so we don't have any institutional knowledge of that. But Liz, do you happen to remember anything? I think you are the longest tenured out of all of us. Do you have any comments on that, or that you know of?
I kind of came in on the you know, latter end of that, but I do think it was frankly more a matter of personalities as much as anything, and there being some new appointees and some folks who had been on the board for quite a long period of time, and their concern about you know, having this strict rotation. Really, would that bring people who had some historic knowledge of MARTA? That's what I remember from that time.
Okay. Jim, Roberta, Stacy, do you have any observations or questions that we can discuss, or any sort of thoughts on this document and kind of the historic rotation or sharing that has been outlined here?
I don't think I've got anything to add to it. You know, one thing that occurred to me, and Liz, you can speak to this, but it doesn't really have to do with the chairmanship. When I first came on the MARTA board, Gwinnett County was even represented, and which was kind of strange. And that ended up getting sorted out in subsequent iterations of the MARTA Act. But they were not eligible to be a chairperson. But it just shows you how it's been fluid over time. And I think that, you know, since I've been on the board, the group has said, yes, we've had this traditional, you know, stepping up next in line, but we weren't wedded to that as an absolute. And we were trying to pick the person who would best serve the authority at that point in time with their skill set. So that's pretty much been it.
Liz, do you have any comment on the Gwinnett piece, or I guess it's probably irrelevant to this discussion if they were never eligible to be chair?
Right, and they were actually both Gwinnett and Clayton each had one appointee that were not eligible to be chair, and it was because those two counties had actually signed the engineering report for the system, although they never held a successful referendum. So that's what distinguished them.
Yeah, Mr. Glaze was the representative for Clayton County for, I know 20 plus years. But Clayton had one seat on the board until our vote in 2014.
Okay, and then when the referendum passed, Clayton got 2 seats and eligible for the chairmanship. Is that correct?
Yep.
Okay.
They had 2 seats beginning in 2015. Yes.
Okay. Stacy, anything you want to add on that, or any questions you have?
I don't have any questions regarding the historical rotation, and I don't remember if we discussed it last time, but I do think it would be beneficial if we documented it someplace that, you know, once an entity joins or becomes a part of MARTA, that they have this sort of, I guess, waiting period before they can actually be chair. And we talked about this before, but I don't remember what the resolve was on that one, or if we even came to anything.
Yeah, well, I don't know if we came to a conclusion, but Liz, do you can you speak to that? I mean, as the way the bylaws are written currently, I'm pretty sure that the MARTA Act is silent on that, but the way the bylaws are written currently, as soon as board members are full-fledged voting members of the board, are they eligible to be chair?
The bylaws are really silent on the whole question of the chair. I think it just is any, you know, voting member of the board is eligible to be chair.
I've got a comment on that.
Go ahead, Jim.
When I was
elected
chair, Roberta, did you want to say something first?
I think she's has somebody at the door, maybe.
Oh. When I was elected chair, I had only been on the board for a year before that. And the reason that I was nominated by the nominating committee is because the nominating committee took a look at the entire board and came to a decision that I was the best qualified to serve as chairperson. So I'm an example of, you know, having the flexibility to pick somebody who's only recently come onto the board.
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Sure.
I don't think that there is any, well, in my mind, I don't have a sense that anybody that's qualified to serve on this board would not be qualified to hold office or serve as chair. So I don't think that was one of the factors at all. I think that the overwhelming concern for me was if it is to be rotated in such a way, then it ought to be rotated in that way. That's the only thing that I really feel strongly about. And if you're looking at from, what did you say, 1967 until, for the most part, as you say, Thomas, they've been pretty much equal. And so the only thing that this chart points out is that Clayton County has never had a term. That's still the fact. Clayton County has not had a term. It's the only jurisdiction that has not.
As we, I mean, I think that I understand why this ad hoc committee was appointed, and I appreciate Roberta, your viewpoint on that, and I get that 100%. I do, Ms. Blakely, I do think that your belief is worth fleshing out insofar as I think that they're asking us to not only look at just the rotation, but how to pick a chair. I think that was our charge, and I think that if that's your opinion, I think that we certainly need to debate that and vote on that and see where everybody comes out on that topic. You know, something that Mr. Durrett has brought to my attention before that I think that I'd like to toss out for an open discussion, because I think it's a really good idea, is that the bylaws are also very silent on who is on a nominating committee. And I think that I've served on 2 nominating committees in my 6 years on the board. And I have found often that the chair, and I'm not casting dispersions on Ms. Hardage or Mr. Ash, both of whom I have close relationships with, but I found in practice that the chair generally appoints board members to the nominating committee that that have no interest in or have no interest in serving as an officer, or no real length of tenure on the board, and it's really kind of a made up arbitrary appointment to the nominating committee. And I think that if we're talking about equity and inclusion in the chairmanship, I think that we should look at where the slate that the board is voting on comes from. And until the election of Ms. Scott and some disagreement among the nominating committee, and that brought that debate into who's elected chair into the full board. Until that event, generally the nominating committee has been comprised of 2 or 3 people, and not everybody's represented. So, I kind of, and Jim, I'd like to turn it over to you on your thoughts on this, but at the very least, putting in the bylaws that a nominating committee shall be appointed by the chair to present a slate to the board for election, and the nominating committee shall be comprised of 1 person from each jurisdiction, so that each jurisdiction has a voice in that room. Jim, you want to talk to that? You're on mute.
Yeah, you said it well. I think that every jurisdiction should be represented on the nominating committee. And today, all it says is that 3 members of the board will serve on the nominating committee, period. So I think that we've got some work that we could do there that would enhance the process and distribute responsibility across the jurisdictions.
Would you add to that members who are not interested in serving as chair?
I think that that could be a very wise suggestion.
The nominating committees I'm used to seeing all have members who are not interested in also being appointed. That's why I just throw that out.
Do you think, Justice Sears, do you think that that would be a legal requirement? Do you think that or let's just, maybe not a legal requirement, but do you think that from corporate governance and ethics, that would be a best practice that you would recommend?
Yes, definitely a best practice. I love the idea of each jurisdiction being a member of on the nominating committee, but I don't like the idea. I don't think it would be best practice that a member of the nominating committee could nominate themselves, or it seems like some kind of conflict or something. And I serve on a number of boards. I've never seen a nominating committee where there were people who were interested in being the chair on the nominating committee.
And I can support that. I just think it's, you know, it needs to be wordsmith so that it makes sense and it's easily managed.
So as I kind of take inventory of some of the discussions we've had over our past two meetings, and please do not think that I'm taking any liberty in purposely putting words into your mouth. But if I'm just going to try to sum it up, kind of where we stand right now, I believe that if I was summing up Ms. Abdul Salam's position, her position would be that the bylaws should be amended to require a sequential pattern of rotation among the jurisdictions. If I was summing up Jim's position, I would say that mandating a sequential pattern of rotation among jurisdictions for chair calls into question each person's fiduciary duty and is a troublesome practice, and that we should, but at the very least, we should make sure that each jurisdiction is represented on the nominating committee. If I was summing Ms. Blakely's position, I think she's still kind of taking in all of the and kind of thinking about where she stands on the rotation of the chairs, but she believes that a best practice might be mandating some institutional knowledge of a jurisdiction via a waiting period before that jurisdiction is eligible for chair. Would that be a fair summation of each one of y'all's positions thus far?
For me, yes. I think mandating a rotation removes the flexibility that should be available to a board to make the best fiduciary decision for the authority.
Roberta?
Sorry, Thomas, but I would agree with that position, Jim, as well as having, and I didn't realize until now that, you know, previously there hadn't been equitable representation on the nominating board. So I fully support there being represented from each of our jurisdictions on there, as well as, you know, the best practice of those members not being interested in holding the chair position.
Thomas,
as well as flushing them out with institutional, you know, institutional knowledge as well. So my apologies, Roberta.
That's okay. Thomas, I was just going to say that probably what should be corrected is that I've been here 6 years, and for the term that I've been here, there have always been representation of each jurisdiction on the nominating committee. So, and if you need to check that, you probably can very easily, but That is the way that it's been explained, and that's the way that it's been done since I've been here. And I think you and I came at the same time, probably. But yeah, I would agree that it needs to have representation from each jurisdiction on the nominating committee. But what I also agree to is I agree with what Jim said at the very first meeting. It has been the practice, and I think the practice should continue. I just think that it should be known that that is the practice.
Well, and I disagree. I think that,
Hey,
I think we should, I would go so far as to say, I think we should abandon an expectation of rotation. Hey,
sorry,
somebody?
I apologize. Can y'all hear me now? My Wi-Fi seemed to go out. Roberta, I think that you brought up a great question as to which I think we can find the answer to. Obviously not today, but I think it's a wise thing to look at, and that is look back through the minutes and see the nominating committee. And I do not question what you said about equal representation on the nominating committee, but I recall serving on a nominating committee with you when we nominated Miss Hardage, and it was only me, you, and Mrs. Ivy. And so that was, if it was just me, you, and Mrs. Ivy, that would have been Clayton Fulton and governor appointee, and not have City of Atlanta or DeKalb. I may be wrong, but that's how I remember it. Does that sound right to you?
No, it doesn't sound right to me.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll get Tyreen to look through the minutes and look at least back on what the nominating committees were for each let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I don't want everybody to pour through the minutes on going all the way back, but maybe we can look at the nominating committees appointed for the last 10 chairs, and let's look at that. I think we're all in agreement that if that is not, if that has not been a practice, that is a good best practice.
Yeah.
And then I think that where the debate in this ad hoc committee and where the disagreement is probably going to be, and where we're probably going to have to vote on this, is whether or not we want to mandate a strict sequential rotation among jurisdictions. And I will tell you that inclusiveness and fairness and equity in the chairmanship, in my personal opinion, is very important. But I also think that our oath as a public fiduciary of a public authority, I have trouble taking away flexibility to vote for who is the best person put forward based on bylaw dictation. So what I would suggest, I summed up what I thought your positions were, so I wanted to share kind of where my position is on that. What I would suggest we do, if it's agreeable to all of you guys, because I like to try to find consensus where we can. I would like to work, with your permission, I would like to work with Ms. Huff and Liz to look through the minutes and look at jurisdictional representation of the nominating committee on the past 10 chairs. I'd like to make a few phone calls to try to get historical perspectives from folks that are no longer with the authority, and I'll report back to you guys on what I found there. But I've been recommended to talk to a couple people on that. And then what I would ask for each of you, meaning my fellow members, Jim, Stacy, and Roberta, is I would like for you to go ahead and put pen to paper and create a document of what you think a bylaw change should look like, and what you believe achieves the mission of what you think is in the best interest of authority as it relates to this topic. And what I think it's easier rather than to talk in the abstract, I view these first two meetings as fact finding, and I think there's a little bit more fact finding I want to do. I think that Roberta's suggestion of looking at jurisdictional representation on nominating committees in the past is a great one. I would like to do my due diligence and talk to some people that can give a historical perspective a little bit greater than those of us on the phone whose exposure to MARTA is, I guess, Roberta, Jim, and Liz. Y'all probably have the longest exposure to MARTA, but I'd like to look back and talk to a few other folks. And then I would like for us to we'll get Tyreen to work with each other to try to find a time that works for all of us within the next 3 weeks. And then maybe if you can circulate to me the documents that you would suggest. And it doesn't have to be in legalese of, amend section 2.3, because I don't expect for you to legalese it. I think that's what Justice Sears and Miss O'Neill are here for, to help us with that. But at least put pen to paper on what you think the plain English language of the bylaw change that you would like to see, if any, should look like. And then I just kind of think that the next meeting, after I report back on the last two sets of fact finding that I would like to do, I would like for us to put each one of those suggestions up on the board and discuss it and try to vote, try to reach consensus and adopt by acclamation. But if we can't reach consensus, at least have something to vote on, up or down, so that we're not just talking about ideas. And then with that, absent the need to go back and edit it, I think we can wrap up our business. So does that sound like an agreeable path forward to each of you, my fellow members?
Yes.
Sounds fine to me.
I agree.
Okay, perfect. Well, Liz and Miss Huff, I'll be in touch with you guys to, looks like we'll go diving through some historic minutes, which sounds like a lot of fun.
Okay.
Especially since they're probably not digitized. We probably can't do a Control F on some of those older ones.
You're exactly right.
But hopefully we can at least we know that the nominating committee probably is appointed and has historically been appointed in September, October, November, for a vote in the December board meeting. So I don't think we have to look at every month minutes. But if we can find those out, and then I'll certainly speak to a few other former MARTA board members and employees and get their perspective. We'll report back to them, and then I will work with Ms. Huff to set a date that gives you with enough notice to kind of give you the opportunity to get a document in to herself and me, so that we can put it on the board and look at what each one of us are thinking.
That's great.
All right. Board Counsel, Justice Sears, is that okay?
Sounds great. It's a great
Authority Counsel, Miss O'Neill, is that okay?
Yes, that sounds good. Thanks.
All right, perfect. Well, with that, we'll adjourn today, and Ms. Huff and I will be in touch.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Bye,
Yes,
everyone.
ma'am.
See you.
Yes, ma'am. Roberta?
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Okay.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.